There's a slight twill in the air. This is our basket we're going to be making today. And the great thing about twill is the farther away from it you get, the more you can see the design. So, here it is. Let's get started. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add our stakes. And you want to add your stakes dry. We are going to add 48 of them. And you want the rough side up. You don't want to get them wet yet. So, and saying that you can see that I have some curve to these from being cut. So, I don't want to get them wet, but what I am going to do is I'm going to dip them in the water where I'm not inserting them. And then what that'll do is it'll help it start to relax. Okay. So I want the rough side facing me. And I have 48 stakes. So basically, that should be 12 stakes in each section. So, depending on what you want to do, you can see that even if that curve you think, oh, well, it goes up, you really have to feel for the rough side, and it's more evident when it's wet. And some are just really good pieces and you can't tell the difference. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's something that you want to achieve. Okay, so I'm going to put 12 in this section here. So you can see that they are relatively tight. And I'm always feeling to make sure that I have the rough side facing me. So I'm going to put 12 in here in one section, and then I'm going to do the other section, but I'm not going to bother you by showing that whole drawn out process. So, where am I at here? You can see they're relatively close, and we're going to twine around them and lock them in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This would be 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Okay, so, and I can space these out so they're a little bit, better spaced, but we do want 12 in each section to get that number. Okay, so that's kind of how those look. And like I say, I'm going to push these over so these ones aren't so tight when I start out. And I'm going to do that around each portion here. Now, you can, this is totally up to you. You can take this twiner at this point and start twining those. And then that way they're not shifted around. That's totally your call. I think we'll go ahead and do that. So you can see what I'm going to do. So then I'll put my next 12 in and twine those and until we've got them all the way around. So what I like to do is take my weaver and I like to make a loop. And in this instance, I'm going to put it over this guy here. And when you twine, bring this down a little bit, it's in front of one, behind one. So you have 2 weavers coming out at you, right? So I've got 1 and 2. And I am right-handed, which means I weave in a clockwise method. Let's see how that's come out. So the other thing you can do too, because these are dry when you put them in, right? So once you get them in, you can spray them. What that does is it makes them swell up and stay in place better. All right, so I can go ahead and do these first 12. And then they are in place, so they're not shifting around and falling out and being a pain, basically. You don't have to do this. You can put all the stakes in, spray them, and then do it. That's fine too. It's just one more way to accomplish the same thing. So whichever way works best for you. And if you are concerned that those aren't getting tight enough in there, you can use a weave right and pack those down in there tight. These look pretty good, but see how I can get that in down just a little bit tighter. That's always a good thing, especially because at this point you are trying to get these, like adhered to the base, right? Woven in tightly. So And I'll do like 2 or 3 strokes and then pull them through. If you want to do in front of one, behind one each time and pull them through, that's great too. It's just the way I weave. Okay. So I got those nice and tight. That's my first 12, and then I've got a 13th here. So I'll go ahead and I'll put those other ones in and weave them around, and then we'll talk again. Okay, so I've gone around twice, and then I'm going to lock these guys in. And the way I do that is I lift up the row before, hopefully with a weave right, can't talk. And I'm going to slip this in. For whatever reason, that's being a pain. A really tight weave. There you go. So, see, just thread it through. Thread it through on that one, and then I'm going to thread it through on this one, and then that locks that weave in. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start bringing those stakes up. So we want to make sure that they're, I'm going to cut that off there, I can trim that back later. I'm going to make sure these are good and wet, because they're going to go up. Now what I do is I like to use the table for this part, and I use some clips as well. So I've got some that I've got wet, and I'm going to grab a couple of clips as I go here. These smaller ones tend to work a little bit better. Having trouble talking today. So little clips like that. I use the bigger ones too, but not at this point. So like 4 little clips. That'll make your life easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to use the table. And I want the rough side to the inside of the basket, right? So when I do this, what I like to do is clip that so it doesn't pull out. And then it's just plain weave over and under, right? And you are telling these guys where to go with your left hand as you weave with your right hand. Bring it up and pull it over again. Now, I know that this will focus in on those stakes, so sometimes it's hard to see what I'm doing, but this is just your basic over and under, all the way around. You shape with your left hand, you weave with your right, if you're right-handed. So I'm going to do 1 row here, and then I am going to show you. So this is start and stop, right? You always start on top of a stake. And then you count past 4. So, and I'm going to do, I think it's 3 rows of this. So, you can see what I'm doing when I come around to the end here. I'll show you how I finish that row. So, this is where we started, right? So we're going to count 4 over. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to make that cut there. Why do we do that? Because you do not want to see where a basket row started. That covers that up. Or where it ended. That covers that one up. So you can't see it. Okay? So I like to keep a clip on that, and then I'll like give it a 1/4 turn, and then I'll start my next one. Using that same weaver, I think. I want to make sure that the rough sides to the inside of the basket again. And I'm going to put a clip on it. And you can clip like every 1/4 of the basket if you want to. That's totally up to you. And I pull this a little bit while I'm doing it. Like I'll do maybe 1 or 2 strokes and I pull just a little bit. And you think, wow, that doesn't make any difference. But it does. Weaving baskets and shaping them, it's all about the subtlety of pressure. And we're taking something that is totally flat and making it go into a vessel, basically, right? You see I got rid of that one from there. Once I've gone past it, I don't need that there anymore. okay? So maybe I do 3 or 4 and then I pull just a little. And maybe that is like 1/8 of an inch that it pulled. It's not a whole bunch. But what that does is it starts giving them some memory and telling them, look, we're not going to be flat. We are going up. So I'm always making sure that my stakes, because they'll tend to drift, are straight up from one another. I don't want them touching each other, because if they do, that's what I've told them. Come together. Well, if I come together too much, then there's no room in between these guys for a weave. So they need to be straight up and down. And that happens by you watching it and shifting all the time. I'm always watching my stakes, pulling it a little bit, making sure they're upright. I don't want it to go too far in. I don't want it to go too far out. But most of that happens just by making sure you got a wet weaver. Wet stakes, no. But a wet weaver. Now I did wet these a little bit just to let them relax, but I don't go back and spray them. I want them to be fairly rigid and my weaver to be very supple or wet, right? So I'm coming around here, and this is my second row, and you can see that my stakes are starting to come up nice now. And I'm coming around to that clip again so that I know. Okay, this is the second row done. And I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to count over 4. So that's where the clip was. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to make my cut here. And that will be row number 2 done. Okay, I'll check it and see. I think there's only 3 rows. Okay, so like I say, I just always put a clip here until the next row comes around and covers it. Just as, because I don't want it springing out. But you can see already that it's starting to come up. It's hard to see from that direction, but it is starting to come up. Okay, so I have 1 more row of this, and then we are going to start doing the twill. So you don't need to see me do this last one. I'll get this done and then we'll start talking about the twill, the diagram, how to read twill, all that good stuff. That's next. So this is probably one of the easiest twill patterns that I've done. And if you look at page 2, there's 2 ways of looking at this. Some people can look at a diagram, they got it. Other people can't do that. It has to be written out what the pattern is for each row, and we do it both ways. The first 3 rows of this are basic over and under. And all it's doing is setting a base for the actual twill to start to occur. So you'll see here that on row 4, it's over 1, under 2. Okay, great. Where does it over 1 at? It's actually over 1 on top of one of the overs from row 3. Okay, so that's where it gets started. So it's over 1, under 2. The next row then, this is like where you're looking at to start your next row. Your next row is over 3, under 3, and that is right on top and centered from the row before. So when I'm looking at twill, I'm looking at, it's great to know the pattern, but you got to know where to start the pattern. So pick one of these guys and go from there. So this is what I'm looking at when I'm designing. I want to do these rows up to here. Okay. And then I'm going to look at how this row is in comparison to this design, basically. This design is complete. Then where do I put this next design at in comparison to this one? Or if it's easier for you, go through here and do it this way. People learn differently. Some people, like I say, need it written out. Some people can look at a diagram and do it. I'm a diagram person, so I'll be at it from that level. But when you do this first design, once you've got that complete, you got to look at how this next design corresponds with that. Okay, so that would be like 2 under, and there's your over. And we'll get to that, but I just wanted to kind of briefly go through that. The other thing I want to talk to you about is space-dyed reed. It's got a lot of dye on it. So when you get it wet, and it needs to be wet in warm water to weave, you need to make sure that you've wiped it 2 or 3 times to make sure that excess is off. You don't want a bunch of bleed, and that's another reason why you don't spray your basket. Okay, so if you wet it all down and say, well, I like to spray it, that's great, but all that space dyed reed is gonna bleed. So don't spray your basket. Make sure you wipe it at least 3 times before you weave with it. Let's get started.